The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office announced that it has completed both Wells' autopsy and toxicology report, but those results are going to stay sealed until the grand jury gets the case. And while the medical findings are off limits, we know Wells' family is doing everything they can to get other information. Nolan's mother, for example, subpoenaed Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, Life360, seeking his messages, photos, GPS data as she pushes for answers as to what happened to her son. What are they going to learn? I want to ask digital forensics analyst Morgan Wright to talk about this. Morgan, good to see you. I have a lot of questions. So first of all, if they get all these records, okay, assuming that the companies don't put up a legal fight, if they get everything they're looking for, best case scenario, what is that going to tell them about what happened to Nolan?
That's a good question, Jesse. The thing I would do is I would take all of that information, I would map it against the GPS we have from the boat, when it left, when it slowed down, when it sped back up, map that with the call, and then map all of the digital media and the time and date stamps and location to that. So you can kind of create like a kaleidoscope, just a compendium of things that show you the timeline. When were pictures taken? What kind of data is there? Was he seen on the island? Was he not? Was he seen on the boat? So, we don't know what we know until they get this information, but I would start with the timeline. I would map the call against the GPS location and then map the social media when you get it to that.
Will they know if information has been deleted from any of the apps from the phone and when it was deleted? Because if they can create a timeline, if he was no longer on the boat and he was on Horn Island, would they be able to know what was deleted and when it was deleted?
Yeah, there's a couple companies out there. One that a lot of people have heard about, Celebrite. They do do a lot of great work on digital forensics, extraction. So yeah, if as long as it hasn't been tampered with or people haven't gotten in there looking around, that's part of the problem, right? Anytime you go in there, you start changing the footprint of what that device was. You want it in the pristine state, but Celebrite could still, an extraction like that could tell you what was there. And most of the time, depending on the operating system, who logged in and how, could tell you what was deleted, when it was deleted. That would give you some ideas if it was deleted. I'm not saying it was, but if it was, a Celebrite report could give you a lot of good facts.
There was news that came out that the family has also issued preservation notices to the family members of Nolan's friends, and I believe investigative agencies as well. My legal point of view, you're putting the pieces in place for a potential lawsuit. I've always wondered, if you go through the lawsuit route, you go through discovery, can they get answers that they may not get through the criminal investigation, the legal investigation, the law enforcement investigation? What kind of data could they get there, and how would that help them in their search for answers?
Well, look, first of all, the preservation notice, when I was a detective, we did the same thing too. It just says, don't delete the records, don't do anything. Spoilage is indication of guilt. I mean, that can be inferred in a court. So I think so far the families are all cooperating from what the record shows. So, and then what you would look at is look for communications, look for text messages, look for anything that shows contemporaneous texts or communications that might be tied with the disappearance of Nolan, when he disappeared, or was he seen? Did anybody say, I saw him? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can get. But when you do that, that's a civil suit, right? So you can get a lot of information in discovery in a civil suit, but the grand jury can get a lot more information because they have full subpoena power, including the toxicology, including the autopsy.
By the way, I love that our digital guy here almost froze. I mean, it seems almost ironic, but we're good. We got you, Morgan. I want to play you something. This was a big piece of news this week. So Nolan Wells' family hired an audio engineer to review this distress call that was made from the boat that day.
A mother's phone rang on the evening of July 4th. She expected her son's voice on the other end. Instead, she got silence. Then a stranger. Then the words, "No parent is built to survive. He never came home." Nolan Wells walked onto Horn Island that afternoon surrounded by friends, music, and the kind of reckless summer energy that makes 21-year-olds feel invincible. He was laughing. He was living. And then, without a single witness stepping forward to say exactly what happened next, he was gone. Not missing in the way people go missing in movies. Gone in the way that leaves a family staring at an empty chair at every dinner table for the rest of their lives. 2 days later, his body washed ashore. And the story his friends told investigators? It started falling apart almost immediately. There is audio from that day. A frantic distress call placed from the boat Nolan rode out on. And buried inside that recording, in the chaos and the noise and the panic, are voices. Saying things. Things that, depending on who you ask, either explain everything or expose everything. We will play it for you. But not yet. What you need to understand first is this. There are people in this story who lawyered up fast. There are phone records someone tried very hard to make disappear. There is a body that went into a second autopsy missing the very organs that could have told us exactly how Nolan Wells died. And there is a mother who has not stopped fighting for a single day since that phone call changed her life forever. This case is disturbing. It involves the death of a young man, questions of foul play, and details that are going to be difficult to sit with. We present everything here with respect for Nolan, for his family, and for the truth they are still waiting on. If you are new to Unsolved Files, welcome. But fair warning, once you go down this road with us, you do not come back the same. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a case, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from tonight. We have viewers everywhere, and every single one of you matters to this community. Now, let's talk about what really happened on Horn Island. Around 3 p.m. on July 4th, Trace's tin shepherd looked over and saw Nolan for the last time. He was sitting near the shoreline with a young woman named Katie McCormick, a 19-year-old who had come to Horn Island independently, not as part of their group. By Shepard's account, Nolan looked relaxed. Nothing about that moment signaled trouble. Then the boat situation changed everything. The Triton had developed mechanical problems. The bilge pump was failing. Water was getting in. One of the guys in the group started calling for everyone to board. When he got to Nolan, he did not ask once. He asked multiple times with urgency. Get on the boat. We are leaving. If you are coming, you need to come now. Nolan's response, according to the friends on that boat, was clear. He said he was staying. He told them he would catch a ride back to the mainland with someone else. His friends have since pointed out that this was not unusual behavior at Horn Island. People regularly arrived on one boat and left on another. It was common enough that no one in the group treated it as alarming in the moment. They left without him. That is the friend's version. Katie McCormick's version is different. Katie was the last known person to speak with Nolan before he disappeared. Her sister Gracie McCormick later spoke publicly on her behalf and disputed the account the friends had given. According to Gracie, when Katie and Nolan finished their conversation, Nolan told Katie he was heading back to the boat. He was not planning to stay. He was leaving. If Katie's account is accurate, Nolan never intended to remain on that island. He told the girl he had just spent part of the afternoon with that he was going to rejoin his group. And then he never made it. Those two versions cannot both be true. Either Nolan told his friends he was staying, or he told Katie he was leaving. The gap between those two statements is where this entire investigation lives. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer, who has publicly reviewed the case, offered a third way of reading the situation. She suggested both accounts might be partially accurate and described it as a timing issue rather than a direct contradiction. Her theory is that Nolan may have initially decided to stay, then changed his mind after his conversation with Katie and started heading back toward the boat, only to find it had already gone. That would explain why two separate people remember two different things without either of them necessarily lying. It is a reasonable interpretation. It is also, notably, the version that does not require anyone to have done anything wrong. What every account agrees on is this. At some point in the mid-afternoon of July 4th, Nolan Wells was standing on Horn Island without a ride home. His group's boat was gone. The island had no phone signal, no facilities, and no guarantee that anyone left on the shore would be heading back to Ocean Springs. He was 18 years old, alone, and surrounded by hundreds of strangers. Whether he chose that situation or ended up in it against his will is the question no one has been able to answer. What happened next is where the timeline falls apart entirely. At approximately 4 p.m., roughly an hour after Trace's tin shepherd last saw Nolan near the shoreline, a call went out to Seto Emergency Services. The dispatcher who answered was a woman named Vicky. The caller identified themselves as being at the west tip of Horn Island and reported that the bilge pump had stopped working. The boat was taking on water. They needed help immediately. The call itself was disorganized. The caller struggled to provide a membership number. Location details came out fragmented. At one point the line went quiet before reconnecting. Vicky worked through it professionally, gathering what she could, but the call ended before a full picture was established. It was the kind of call that signals genuine panic, not a staged performance. That audio was later released publicly by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. It was not sourced from social media. It was an official release from a state agency, and that distinction matters because of what came next. After the recording circulated online, listeners began claiming they could hear voices in the background referencing Nolan by name. Some interpreted those background sounds as evidence that Nolan was on the boat during the distress call, which would directly contradict the friend's account that he had stayed behind on the island an hour earlier. Officer Brandon Tatum, a former law enforcement officer with a prominent YouTube channel who had personally interviewed several of Nolan's friends, pushed back on that interpretation. His argument was grounded in context. Multiple witnesses had placed Nolan on the island after the friends said they left. Video from the boat, which Tatum's team reviewed, showed the boat's occupants and Nolan was not among them. GPS data from the boat placed it still in close proximity to the island at the time of the call, meaning the boat was surrounded by other vessels and hundreds of people. If something serious had happened on that boat at that moment, Tatum argued, someone in that crowd would have seen it. His reading of the background audio was that the words people believed they were hearing could be explained by the chaos of a sinking vessel. Crew members yelling about equipment, water levels, or debris could produce sounds that the human brain, primed to look for patterns, interprets as something more specific. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources and the Sheriff's Office have not publicly confirmed or denied what those background voices say. What they have confirmed is the GPS problem. Data pulled from the boat afterward showed it did not leave the island until approximately 4:30 p.m. The friends had described departing earlier in the afternoon. That 30-minute gap between the distress call and the actual departure, combined with the earlier stated timeline, created a discrepancy investigators could not ignore. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter addressed it directly. He stated publicly that if the account given by the group does not match what the GPS data shows, there is a problem with that account. Ledbetter's office also issued a specific request to anyone on or near the northwest tip of Horn Island that day. They asked for original, unedited photos and videos, and they used particular language in that request. They were looking specifically for footage depicting alleged altercations or any images believed to include Nolan Wells. That word, altercations, did not appear by accident. When Nolan did not come home that night, his family started making calls. Nobody had heard from him. Nobody knew where he was. And when his family tried to locate his phone using a tracking app, what they found raised the first hard question of the investigation. His phone was not on Horn Island. It was on land. Someone had taken it off the island when the group left. According to Ben Crump, Nolan's friends had his phone with them when they departed. A friend went to where the tracker placed it and retrieved it. When the device was returned to Nolan's family, they discovered that messages had been deleted. That is not an allegation. That is confirmed. Investigators have been working to recover the erased data. The family's legal team and law enforcement reached an agreement for a mutual forensic inspection of the phone, with experts from both sides present. That process was still ongoing at the time of this recording. Crump framed the phone situation in simple terms that have not been effectively countered. He asked publicly what 18-year-old willingly stays on a remote island with no phone, no way to contact anyone, and no confirmed ride home. Horn Island has no communications infrastructure. No cell signal. No way to call for help if something went wrong. The idea that Nolan handed over his phone or left it behind by choice does not sit comfortably alongside anything else known about that afternoon. Then a video surfaced. Crump's independent investigation team obtained footage that had been recorded on Horn Island on July 4th. At a press conference, Crump described what he said witnesses told him. That Nolan could be heard in the video demanding his phone back, saying words to the effect of "Give me my phone, what are you doing?" Crump presented this as a witness account, and for a period it became one of the most discussed elements of the case online. Then Trace's Tin Shepard came forward. Shepard said publicly and directly that the voice in that video was his, not Nolan's. He explained there had been a separate physical altercation on the island between himself and a stranger, someone outside their group entirely, and the yelling captured in that footage was him trying to break free from people who were holding him back from continuing that fight. He stated Nolan was not visible in the video, though he said Nolan was in the general area at the time, nearby but out of frame. Javon Williams, another friend who was present that day, separately told a media outlet that he also did not believe the voice in the video belonged to Nolan. Crump acknowledged the dispute publicly. He told reporters his team would be more careful going forward to present witness statements as unverified until they could be confirmed. That correction matters. It does not erase the broader questions in the case, but it shows how difficult it is to build a clean picture when accounts are still shifting weeks in. What has not been resolved is whether any altercation on that island involved Nolan directly. The Sheriff's Department asked specifically for footage of alleged altercations. That request remains open. The answers it might produce have not yet surfaced publicly. Nolan never came home that night. The next time anyone would locate him, it would not be through a tracking app. On the morning of July 6, 2 days after the 4th of July party, a United States park ranger conducting a routine patrol along the Horn Island shoreline found a body in the water. It was Nolan Xavier Wells. He was 18 years old. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind responded to the scene. In his public statement to CNN, Lind said there were no immediate obvious signs of foul play or trauma visible on the body at the time of discovery. That is the clinical language of an initial field assessment, not a final determination. Lind was clear about the distinction. Because of the uncertain circumstances surrounding Nolan's disappearance, he made the decision not to assign a cause of death at the scene. Instead, he requested a full autopsy from the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office so that trained forensic pathologists could examine the body under controlled conditions and determine whether any foul play or trauma had been missed in the field. That autopsy was conducted on July 7th, the day after the body was recovered. As of the recording of this video, the results have not been made public. They remain pending, held while standard toxicology testing is completed. What had already entered the record before the autopsy was a document from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources dated July 5th, the day before Nolan's body was found. That email, which circulated to search crews, described Nolan's alcohol consumption on July 4th as heavy, based on accounts from witnesses who had been on the island. It also noted he had last been seen in the company of an unidentified female. That document was an operational summary prepared for search personnel, not a forensic finding. But it established early on that investigators were already building a picture of Nolan's condition in the hours before he disappeared. The state autopsy results, when released, will either answer the questions that document raised or deepen them. Until then, Nolan's family was not prepared to wait for an institution they were no longer sure they trusted. The Wells family did not wait long. Within days of Nolan's body being recovered, they retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump. If that name is familiar, it should be. Crump has represented the families of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, among others. His entry into a case signals that a family has lost confidence in the official investigation and is prepared to fight on a national stage. That is exactly what happened here. Crump brought in fellow attorney Liza Park as part of the legal team and assigned attorney Eric Hertz to lead the independent investigation on the ground in Mississippi. Hertz and his team began receiving between 50 and 100 calls per day from people who had been on Horn Island or knew people who were there. That volume of incoming information tells you something about how many people witnessed pieces of that day and had not yet spoken to law enforcement. The legal team moved quickly on the digital evidence front. Subpoenas went out to multiple technology companies with a single purpose: preserve social media records, messages, and phone data before anything else could be deleted or lost. That step was taken because the family already knew messages on Nolan's phone had been erased. They were not willing to watch the same thing happen to anyone else's records. Crump and the family then sat down with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath. That meeting was described publicly as respectful. What came out of it was significant. The DA confirmed that once investigators finished gathering evidence, the case would be handed to a grand jury. That is now the official next legal step. A grand jury means that civilian jurors, not prosecutors alone, will review the full body of evidence and decide whether criminal charges are warranted against anyone. The FBI also entered the picture, though their involvement has been specifically described as focused on interstate threats connected to the case rather than the core death investigation itself. On the financial side of the case, filmmaker and philanthropist Tyler Perry quietly covered the full cost of Nolan's funeral. The service was held at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs on July 20th. Former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick's organization funded the independent autopsy through an initiative that provides forensic examinations in cases involving deaths connected to law enforcement or custodial circumstances. Not everyone in positions of power was moving in the same direction. Governor Tate Reeves made public statements that Crump and others characterized as an effort to undermine Crump's credibility rather than address the substance of the family's concerns. Separately, a tip line set up in connection with the case was reportedly routed to the office of Judge Ashley Cole rather than directly to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. No public explanation for that routing has been provided. The racial dimension of this case has been openly discussed in national coverage. Mississippi carries a specific and documented history when it comes to the deaths of young black men and the investigations that follow. That history is not a backdrop. For many people following this case, it is the lens through which every institutional decision is being evaluated. The family wanted their own answers. They started with the body. The independent autopsy was conducted in Washington, D.C. by Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, Jr., a forensic pathologist and former chief medical examiner with decades of experience, who also serves as president of the forensic pathology program at Morehouse School of Medicine. This was not a fringe hire. Mitchell is a credentialed, nationally respected figure in his field. The findings from his examination were announced on July 22 at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago, where Ben Crump presented the results with Nolan's parents Christine Wells Wansley and Elmore Wansley present. The conclusion: cause and manner of death undetermined pending further investigation. Not drowning. Not homicide. Undetermined. And the reason Mitchell could not reach a definitive conclusion comes down to three specific limitations that the script of this case demands be understood clearly. The first limitation was the most significant. When the state medical examiner conducted the original autopsy on July 7th, the organs were removed and dissected as part of standard procedure. That is normal practice. What it meant for Mitchell, however, was that when Nolan's body arrived for the second examination, the lungs and airway were no longer available for direct observation. In a suspected drowning, the lungs and airway are among the most critical structures a pathologist examines. Without them, Mitchell could not confirm that drowning occurred. He also could not examine the stomach contents for water ingestion. His own words in the report described this as the most significant barrier to a definitive conclusion. The second limitation was the missing throat. Specifically, the trachea, the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone were not included when Nolan's body was sent for the independent examination. Mitchell, drawing on his experience as a former chief medical examiner, noted that retaining those structures is standard practice when a pathologist suspects potential neck compression or fracture. He assumed the state pathologist had kept them for that reason. But their absence meant Mitchell was unable to assess whether any injury to the neck contributed to or caused Nolan's death. He stated this directly in his report. He cannot rule out a neck injury. He has since called on the state to share those specific findings with him. As of this recording, no public response to that request has been made. The third limitation was decomposition. By the time Mitchell received the body, it had been in the water, recovered, refrigerated, and subjected to one full autopsy. Days of decomposition had already altered the tissue in ways that made it impossible to reliably assess bruising or surface trauma. What might have been visible on a fresh examination was no longer readable. Within all of those limitations, one finding stood out. Mitchell identified red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's skull, sitting beneath the skin surface. Its cause has not been explained. No fractures were found on the body. No lacerations. But that discoloration remains an open question. Dr. Priya Banerjee, a board-certified forensic pathologist who commented publicly on the case, offered important context. She noted that second autopsies always carry inherent limitations because the body is no longer in its original state after a first examination. She also pointed out that it is not unusual for an independent examiner to lack access to the first autopsy's internal findings due to laws governing public release of that information. These are not excuses. They are the structural realities of forensic investigation that every case involving a second autopsy must navigate. If you want to be here the moment those state autopsy results are released publicly and when this case goes to a grand jury, subscribe to Unsolved Files right now. This case is still moving. You do not want to miss what comes next. The official results are still out there. And when they surface, everything in this case could shift. As of the recording of this video, nearly 4 weeks have passed since Nolan Wells disappeared on Horn Island. Here is exactly where every thread of this case currently stands. The state autopsy results are not public. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office conducted its examination on July 7th. Those findings are being held pending the completion of standard toxicology testing. Toxicology can take weeks, sometimes longer. When those results finally surface, they will either support the accidental drowning theory investigators lean toward early on, raise new questions, or directly contradict what the independent autopsy could not determine. Until that report is released, the official medical conclusion on how Nolan died does not exist in the public record. The grand jury has not yet convened. District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath confirmed the case will go before one, but no timeline has been publicly set. That process cannot begin until investigators finish gathering and organizing their evidence. 60 witnesses have been interviewed. More may follow. The phone forensics are ongoing. The mutual inspection between the family's experts and law enforcement has been agreed upon but has not yet produced public findings. The deleted messages have not been recovered or identified publicly. What was erased, who erased it, and when remain open questions with no answers on record. The missing throat structures from the first autopsy have not been publicly accounted for. Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr. has called on the state to share those findings with him directly. No public response to that request has come from the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. The tip line routing to Judge Ashley Cole's office instead of the Jackson County Sheriff's Department has not been explained. No statement clarifying how or why that happened has been issued by any party involved. No charges have been filed. No arrests have been made. No one has been publicly named as a suspect. The GPS discrepancy between the boat's actual departure time and the timeline the group gave investigators has been flagged by Sheriff John Ledbetter but remains unresolved in the public record. What this case has 4 weeks in is a family without answers, a community without closure, a grand jury waiting in the distance, and a set of forensic and investigative questions that the institutions responsible for answering them have not yet addressed publicly. Nolan Wells deserves better than that. So does the truth. The night before he disappeared, Nolan Wells cooked his family salmon for dinner. He hugged his mother. He kissed her goodbye. He walked out the door with his whole life still ahead of him, a college football scholarship signed, a team waiting for him, a future that looked exactly like what an 18-year-old's future is supposed to look like. He was not a headline when he left that house. He was a son. 5 months before that July 4th, Nolan stood on a stage on National Signing Day and told a reporter it was a blessing to be heading to college with his closest friends and teammates. His coach Jake Bramlett called him beloved. His friend Traces Tin Shepard said he lit up every room he walked into. His father Elmore Wansley called him an elite athlete. These are not eulogies crafted for cameras. These are the words people who knew him reached for when they tried to explain who they had lost. That is who went to Horn Island on July 4, 2026. And that is who never came back. What we are left with is a case that has more open doors than closed ones. A boat that the GPS says did not leave when the group says it did. A phone that came home without its owner with messages someone had deleted. A distress call with disputed background audio. A last conversation between Nolan and a young woman where two different versions of what he said cannot both be true. An independent autopsy that could not reach a conclusion because the most important structures were either removed or missing. A red discoloration at the back of a young man's skull that no one has explained. A tip line routed to the wrong office. A grand jury that has been promised but not yet seated. And a state autopsy sitting behind closed doors while a family waits. Christine Wells Wansley has not stopped. Not for a single day since that phone call changed her life on the evening of July 4th. She stood at a podium at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago and she spoke. She has been at every press conference, every legal proceeding, every public moment of this investigation. She is not waiting for the system to deliver justice on its own timeline. She is pushing that timeline forward with everything she has. Ben Crump and his team are still working. Eric Hertz is still fielding calls from witnesses. The forensic experts are still going through Nolan's phone. The grand jury is coming. The state autopsy results will eventually surface. And when they do, this case will move again in one direction or another. Here is what we know for certain. Nolan Xavier Wells was on Horn Island on July 4, 2026. He was seen alive at 3 p.m. His body was found in the water on the morning of July 6. Everything between those two facts is still being fought over, investigated, disputed, and reconstructed by attorneys, pathologists, sheriffs, federal agents, and a mother who refuses to accept silence as an answer. This file is not closed. Not even close. If you are watching this and you have a thought about what happened on that island, we want to hear it. Drop it in the comments below. Tell us where in the world you are watching from. This community spans every corner of the globe and every perspective in these comment sections has value. And if you are not yet subscribed to Unsolved Files, do it now. When the state autopsy results drop, we will cover every detail. When that grand jury convenes, we will be here. When this case breaks open, you will not want to find out you missed it. Nolan Wells was somebody's son. He deserves the truth. And we are not going anywhere until this case gets it.